Before Gideon Vale lost his store, before Sheriff Pike surrendered his badge, and before 9 families learned why their land deeds had disappeared, there was only an old hog standing over a flour sack. Morrow would not eat. That alone drew laughter. For 12 years, the boar had swallowed everything from turnip skins to candle grease. Yet when Vale Mercantile delivered flour to the reopened Fort Mercy, Morrow backed away, as if the sacks carried fire. 11 years earlier, the fort's winter rations had vanished under Silas Boone's charge. 318 meals were entered beside his signature. Gideon Vale, then a civilian quartermaster, supplied emergency food and emerged a hero. Silas lost his work, his standing,
old, huh,
and nearly
boy?
everyone who once spoke his name with respect. He told himself Morrow was
Nothing wrong
simply
with
old,
that.
though the hog had known the fort long before the town forgot Silas. As a piglet, Morrow had followed Asa Wynn whenever Silas's nephew carried grain into the east shed. After midnight, Silas woke to an empty pen and followed crooked hoofprints through fresh sleet. He found Morrow inside the abandoned quartermaster's room, shivering above
You
a loose
shouldn't be
floorboard.
here.
The hog's weak hind
You
leg
always know
folded
where
twice,
I am.
but he kept striking the softened wood until one corner lifted. Beneath it lay a canvas packet tied with resin black cord, like the rope on Vale's flour sacks. Inside were unused ration chits, a brass sealing die, and a list of delivery weights written in a man's hand. Along the margin were 9 family names followed by parcel numbers Silas did not recognize. Silas knew the handwriting. It belonged to Asa, the clerk the town claimed had fled after helping him steal the food. The final line was unfinished. The sacks were full when they entered the east shed. They were light when Morrow lowered his snout toward a second board. Something beneath it answered with the dull knock of metal. Silas did not lift the second board. Bootsteps crossed the outer corridor before his fingers reached the warped edge. Morrow heard them too and backed beneath the quartermaster's desk. Silas gathered the canvas packet against his chest and pressed one hand over the loose plank. A lantern appeared beneath the door. "County property closes at sundown," a man called. Silas recognized Deputy Harlan Say, young enough to have been a child during the hunger winter and old enough to repeat its verdict without question. He pushed the packet inside his coat, coaxed Morrow upright, and opened the door. Say looked from the hog to the dirt on Silas's knees. "You break in? The north window has no latch." "That was not my question." Morrow leaned against Silas's leg, trembling. Another minute on the floor might leave him unable to walk home. "I came after what belongs to me," Silas said. The deputy smiled. "Nothing in this fort belongs to you." He escorted them through the gate, but did not search Silas. In Mercy Crossing, no one expected Silas Boone to carry anything worth stealing. The walk to his cabin took nearly an hour. Morrow slowed at every drift of sleet. Twice, Silas stopped beneath cottonwood branches and rubbed warmth into the hog's stiff hind leg. Dawn had begun to pale the prairie when they reached the abandoned lime kiln. Silas rented 3 acres behind it. His roof leaked over the stove. The well rope had frayed thin, and the door closed only when wedged with a horseshoe. He survived by sharpening knives, smoking meat, and cooking at branding camps where employers paid him after dark so customers would not complain. A notice had been nailed beside the door. Fort Mercy, County Development Board, vacate within 14 days. The county wanted the land for a wagon road serving the reopened depot. 14 days to move a stove, 2 blankets, 6 cooking pots, and a hog no landlord would accept. The notice carried Gideon Vale's signature beneath those of 4 board members. At the bottom, in smaller print, the county offered Silas $5 if he left before the 7th day, and nothing if the sheriff had to remove him. $5 would not rent a room for a month. It would barely pay a drover to haul Morrow beyond the county line. Morrow ignored the notice and limped toward his trough. Silas poured warm mash made from cracked barley and broth. The hog ate slowly, then stopped halfway. That troubled Silas more than the deputy or the eviction. Morrow had never abandoned food after deciding it was safe. "You spent everything you had proving a point I don't understand," Silas murmured. Inside, he hid the packet beneath the stove and waited for daylight before examining it. The ration chits bore consecutive numbers. The brass die fit comfortably in his palm. Asa's list offered only weights, wagon numbers, and marks in the margin. 9 names appeared there, each followed by a parcel number and a small cross. Silas recognized 2, Jacob Rill and Thomas Mercer. Both had owned farms east of the fort. Both had lost them during the years after the shortage. He folded the page. two names were not a pattern. 11 years of shame had taught him how easily a desperate man could turn coincidence into salvation. At mid-morning, Gideon Vale arrived in a polished black wagon, carrying a paper sack. Coffee, salt, and 2 pounds of bacon rested inside. "I heard Morrow wandered into the fort," Gideon said. His tone held concern rather than accusation. "An old animal can become confused in weather like this. He found his way home. So did you." "I am glad of that." Silas did not take the sack. Gideon glanced at the mud on his boots. "The county inspection begins Monday. Sheriff Pike has been asked to keep people away from unsafe rooms. Some floors have rotted through." "You knew which room Morrow entered?" Deputy Say mentioned it. The answer came easily. Gideon had always understood that truth sounded strongest when delivered without haste. He set the sack on the porch. "The development board may have kitchen work once the depot opens. You know how to stretch provisions. A steady wage could buy a new well rope, rent a shed beyond the county road, and keep Morrow from being sold." Then Gideon added softly, "But the board will expect the past to remain settled." "Settled for whom?" "For people who have already paid enough." He returned to his wagon, leaving the food behind. Silas waited until the wheels disappeared before taking the packet from beneath the stove. Gideon had not threatened him. He had offered work, food, and a path out of disgrace. Refusing felt foolish. Accepting felt worse. Near noon, Morrow forced himself upright, crossed the cabin, and dropped something at Silas's feet. A bent iron nail lay between them, blackened with the same resin that stained the cord. Silas had seen it caught in Morrow's hoof when they left the fort. Beneath its head clung a scrap of blue-painted wood. The second board had not been part of the original floor. It had once belonged to a military supply chest. Silas wrapped Asa's list inside his shirt and took the lantern from its hook. Morrow tried to follow, but his hind leg buckled at the threshold. Not this time. The hog struck the floor once with his snout as Silas closed the door. By dusk, Silas was inside the quartermaster's room again. Fresh boot prints marked the corridor. Someone had visited since dawn. The first hiding place was bare, its dust disturbed. Silas knelt beside the second board and fitted his knife beneath the blue-painted edge. The wood rose with a long, reluctant groan. Below it sat the corner of an iron-bound chest. Across the lid, someone had carved 3 words. "Weigh them again." The chest would not clear the opening. Silas worked the knife around its rim until the rotten boards surrendered another inch. The iron corners had swollen with rust, and one handle was missing, but the lid remained locked. He wedged a stove poker beneath the clasp and leaned until the metal snapped with a sound too loud for the empty fort. Inside lay 6 rectangular weights wrapped in flour cloth. They looked like the counterweights once used on the quartermaster's beam scale, each block stamped with a number and the territorial seal. Silas lifted the first. The mark read 50 pounds, yet it felt wrong in his hands. He had carried enough sacks during the hunger winter to know the difference between 50 pounds and something lighter. Beneath the weights rested a narrow ledger with its cover torn away. Most pages had been removed. The remaining leaves listed wagon numbers, sack counts, and columns headed "Received" and "Released." Several figures had been scratched through so deeply that the paper had nearly split. Asa's initials appeared at the bottom of 3 pages, but Silas's name appeared on none. A door slammed somewhere near the gate. Silas replaced the lid, pushed the loose boards over the opening, and took only the smallest weight and 2 ledger leaves. Hiding the block beneath his coat made him walk stiffly, but he reached the north window before lantern light entered the corridor. He dropped into the sleet and crossed the rear yard without looking back. Morrow was still beside the cabin door when Silas returned. The hog had managed to push the lower hinge loose and stood with his shoulder against the gap. His breath came in short white clouds. Silas knelt, checked the weak leg, and found swelling along the joint. "You stayed put," he said. "That may be the first sensible thing either of us has done." Morrow sniffed the hidden weight before Silas removed it. Instead of backing away as he had from the flour sacks, he pressed his snout against the stamped face and grunted once. Silas cleared the table. His own kitchen scale was too small for the block, so he hung an iron rod between 2 chairs and built a balance from butcher's hooks, rope, and a plank. On one side, he suspended the marked weight. On the other, he added 5-pound salt stones he used for curing meat. The beam leveled at 42 pounds. He tested it again with firewood weighed the previous week. 42 pounds. The missing 8 pounds did not prove theft. A corroded weight could lose metal, though not enough to matter without leaving damage. This block was smooth. Its corners were intact. Someone had cast it light and stamped it as full measure. Silas spread the ledger leaves beneath the lamp. One wagon had entered the east shed, with 64 sacks recorded at 50 pounds each. The release column listed the same number of sacks, but beside it, Asa had penciled a second figure, 2,688. 64 sacks at 42 pounds. The false weight had not made flour vanish after delivery. It had allowed short sacks to be accepted as full before they reached the kitchen. The official records could remain correct while 8 pounds disappeared from every sack. Silas counted the shipment lines still visible. If the same measure had been used across the 3 surviving pages, more than 600 pounds had been removed before a cook touched the stores. A knock sounded at the door. Sheriff Amos Pike entered without waiting for permission. Snow clung to the shoulders of his brown coat, and Deputy Say stood behind him with one hand resting near his holster. Pike's eyes moved from the makeshift scale to the paper on the table. "You were told to stay out of Fort Mercy." "I was told the floors were unsafe." That was the polite version. Silas kept one hand on the ledger leaves. "Did Gideon send you?" "The county sent me." Vale informed the board that old military property may have been removed during the night. The sheriff spoke as though discussing a fence dispute. He had the calm face of a man who preferred citizens to surrender before they understood they had been cornered. "This was buried under the quartermaster's floor," Silas said, touching the weight. "It is stamped 50. It weighs 42. Pike did not examine the balance. "Your rope scale is not county equipment. Use the mercantile scale. That weight, assuming it came from the fort, is evidence in a possible theft. Evidence of something older, perhaps. But you do not decide that by carrying it home." Morrow rose behind the stove. A low sound moved through his chest, not quite a growl. Pike glanced toward him. "Keep the animal controlled." "He is controlled. Deputy Say says the hog damaged county flooring. The board can charge you for repairs." Say stepped forward with a canvas evidence bag. Silas understood the purpose before Pike named it. "The weight and papers come with us," the sheriff said. "You may file a statement tomorrow. If I hand them over, will they be weighed?" "They will be inventoried." "That was not my question." For the first time, irritation sharpened Pike's expression. "You are a man under a removal order who entered restricted property twice. Do not mistake restraint for agreement." Silas looked at the ledger leaves. If he refused, Pike could arrest him, seize the cabin, and leave Morrow tied outside in the cold. If he surrendered everything, the proof might disappear into the same rooms that had hidden it for 11 years. He handed over the weight. Pike placed it in the bag without lifting it with both hands. His wrist dipped, and for a moment his eyes narrowed at the unexpected lightness. He recovered quickly. Silas gave him one ledger page and folded the other beneath his palm. Say saw the movement. "There were 2. One is mine. None are yours," Pike said. Morrow limped from behind the stove and shoved his snout beneath the table. The chair shifted against Saya's knee. While the deputy cursed and reached for the animal, Silas slid the remaining page into the split lining of his coat. Pike seized Morrow by the ear. The hog cried out and twisted. His weak leg collapsed beneath him. Silas crossed the room before he knew he had moved. "Let him go." Pike released the ear but did not step back. "That animal enters the fort again. The county will classify him as destructive livestock. You understand what follows." Silas understood. After they left, Morrow remained on the floor. Silas warmed a cloth, wrapped the swollen joint, and sat beside him until the trembling eased. The threat had worked. Returning to the fort would risk the only living creature that had stood beside him through every year of disgrace. Near midnight, Silas removed the hidden ledger leaf. A strip of paper had been pasted over the bottom line. Moisture from his coat had loosened one corner. He steamed it above the kettle and peeled it away. Underneath was not another shipment total. It was a destination. Val, Relief, Warehouse, South Cellar. Beside it, Asa had written 8 words. Returned at full price to the hungry families. Silas stared at the sentence until the lamp flame blurred. The flour had not merely been skimmed and sold elsewhere. It had been taken before reaching Fort Mercy, then sold back to the same people whose rations were declared missing. Morrow lifted his head from the blanket. Outside, wagon wheels rolled along the frozen road toward town. Silas opened the door a crack and saw two Vale mercantile wagons moving south without lanterns. Both carried flour sacks. Both were headed toward the old relief warehouse. Silas waited until the second wagon vanished beyond the cottonwoods before saddling the old roan he borrowed from a neighbor during branding season. Morrow watched from the blanket near the stove, his swollen leg wrapped in wool. When Silas reached for the lantern, the hog tried to rise. "You have done enough." Morrow pushed once, failed, and settled, with his head raised toward the road. Silas barred the door from outside and rode south, without a light. The relief warehouse stood 2 miles beyond town beside a dry branch of the Red Ash River. During the hunger winter, families had lined beneath its awning with tin cups and promissory notes. The building had been closed for years, yet fresh wagon ruts cut through the snow. Silas left the roan behind a stand of willow and approached on foot. One wagon waited at the loading door. The other had already been backed inside. Through a crack in the boards, Silas saw 3 men stacking flour sacks beneath the rafters. None wore Vale mercantile coats. They moved quickly, slicing the black cords, folding the marked cloth inward, and resewing each mouth with plain white thread. On a table lay a bucket of lime water and a wooden rubbing block used to fade the printed merchant marks. The sacks were not being emptied. They were being made anonymous. A thin man stood beside the tally board, reading numbers from a ledger. Silas recognized Vernon Shaw, the county clerk who had once copied supply receipts at Fort Mercy. 11 years had narrowed his shoulders, but not changed the habit of wetting his thumb before turning every page. "Fort delivery, 60 sacks, Vernon said. "Relief reserve, 52. One of the workers glanced up. "What about the difference?" "Shrinkage." The word struck Silas harder than a confession. 8 sacks could disappear on paper without anyone cutting a single bag. The false weights created one shortage. The false count created another. Silas leaned closer. His boot pressed a crust of ice against the foundation. The snaps silenced the room. Vernon closed the ledger. One worker lifted a lantern and crossed toward the wall. Silas slipped behind a stack of empty crates, waited until the rear door opened, then crawled beneath the loading platform. Boots passed within a yard of his face. "Fox, maybe," someone said. Vernon answered, "Foxes do not wear square heels." Silas held his breath until the men returned inside. Beneath the platform, his hand touched a length of resin-black cord half buried in frozen mud. Knotted around it was a small lead tag stamped V.S. Vernon Shaw. The initials were enough to tempt him. Vernon had copied the old receipts. Vernon was altering the new tally. Vernon had access to both the fort and the relief warehouse. Perhaps Gideon Vale had been guilty only of trusting the wrong clerk. Silas pocketed the tag and retreated toward the willow. A woman stood beside his horse. Clara Wynne held the reins in one gloved hand and a short-barreled shotgun in the other. She was Asa's mother and Silas's older sister, though 11 silent years had made the blood between them feel like a story told about strangers. "You always did choose the loudest way to sneak," she said. Silas looked at the gun. "Planning to use that?" "Depends whether those men come outside." She led the horse deeper among the trees. Her face had aged sharply since he last saw her at Asa's empty funeral service, where the town buried a coat because there had been no body. "What brought you here?" he asked. "The wagons pass my house when they use the river road. 3 nights this week, always after midnight." "You could have told the sheriff." "I did, the first night." Pike said the county was moving spoiled flour away from the depot. Silas showed her the lead tag. "Vernon Shaw is changing the counts." Clara studied it without touching. "Vernon changes whatever number he is paid to change." "You knew?" "I knew he kept 2 tally boards during the winter Asa disappeared." Silas felt anger rise before sense could slow it. "You never said that. You never asked what I knew. You asked me to tell the town you were innocent. My innocence was part of it. Till you." She lowered the gun but kept her eyes on the warehouse. Asa came home 2 nights before he vanished. His coat smelled of pine resin, and there was flour beneath his cuffs. He said the wagons were wrong. He said they went into the east shed heavy and came out light. I thought he meant someone was stealing after delivery. Why keep quiet? Because Gideon Vale brought me a note the next morning with Asa's name signed at the bottom. It said he had gone west and confessed to helping you. Asa would not have written that. I know that now. The answer held no defense, only fatigue. Clara had rented her house from Vale for 12 years. The bargain was suddenly visible. Silence in exchange for a roof. A lantern moved inside the warehouse. Vernon's voice carried through the boards. Burn the old tally sheets before the investigator arrives. Keep only the county copies. Silas turned toward the platform. Clara caught his sleeve. There are 3 men inside. There may be 11 years on that table. And if they catch you, Pike will call this burglary. Gideon will call it grief. The town will believe whichever word lets them sleep. She was right, which made leaving harder. Silas watched smoke begin to rise from a stovepipe near the rear room. Paper was already burning. Clara pulled him toward the horse. There is another way. She took him to her house by the river road, a narrow place, with a roof patched in 3 colors. From beneath a loose stone in the hearth, she removed a folded wagon receipt. The paper had been handled so often that its creases had become white. My husband drove relief loads for Vale, she said. This was his last run before he died. The receipt recorded 60 sacks collected from Fort Mercy. At the bottom, the warehouse clerk had acknowledged 52, 8 missing again. Silas compared the signature with the initials on the lead tag. The clerk's name was Vernon Shaw. This proves he received fewer than the fort released. No, Clara said. It proves he wrote fewer. She turned the sheet over. A second hand had penciled the team weight before departure and after return. The difference showed the wagon had unloaded all 60 sacks. Silas read the figures twice. Vernon's receipt was false, but the flour had reached the warehouse. The 8 missing sacks existed only in the record. Someone later used that paper shortage to justify selling flour from the same building at emergency prices. Who wrote the team weights? My husband. Would anyone recognize his hand? Reverend Hart might. He kept the church feed accounts and watched Jacob sign them every month. A knock struck the front door. Clara folded the receipt, but not quickly enough. A voice outside identified Sheriff Pike. Silas moved toward the back room. Clara stopped him and opened the door herself. Pike stood on the porch with Vernon Shaw behind him. We are looking for Silas Boone, the sheriff said. Someone saw his horse near county property. Clara's face did not change, then asked the horse. Vernon looked past her into the room. His gaze settled on the flour dust melting from Silas's boot prints near the hearth. He smiled before Pike saw them. That will not be necessary, Vernon said. Mr. Boone has already told us where he has been. Pike stepped across Clara's threshold before she invited him in. Vernon followed more slowly, brushing snow from his sleeves, while his eyes remained on the damp flour marks near the hearth. Clara moved between them and the fire. My brother came to ask about Asa. At this hour? Pike asked. Grief has never kept office hours. Silas stood near the back room with his coat closed over the hidden ledger leaf. The wagon receipt was no longer in Clara's hand. He had not seen where she put it. Vernon pointed to the floor. Those marks came from the relief warehouse. They came from flour, Clara said. This is a kitchen. Pike's patience thinned. Silas, you entered county property after being warned away. Come outside. Do you have a warrant to search my house? Clara asked. For several seconds, only the fire spoke. Removing a widow without paper would look different from removing Silas from an abandoned fort. Pike finally ordered Silas to report to his office at 8 the next morning. Vernon lingered. His gaze dropped to the ash bucket beside the stove. Clara followed it, and Silas understood. She had hidden the receipt beneath the cooling cinders. Asa copied numbers he did not understand, Vernon said quietly. You have spent 11 years making a martyr of a frightened boy. Clara's face hardened. You were the last man seen working beside him. That does not make me the last man he trusted. After they left, Clara dug the receipt from the ashes. One corner had browned, but the figures remained clear. They carried it to the church beneath her shawl. Reverend Elias Hart examined the penciled team weights beside a north window. Jacob Wynne made these numbers. He formed his 7s like fence hooks and never closed the top of a 4. Will you say that before Pike? Silas asked. I will say what I know. I cannot say what the numbers mean. Clara placed the receipt beside the church feed ledger. Jacob's handwriting matched entries made over 9 years. Hart could verify the hand, but the paper still proved only that Vernon had written a false count. It did not show who ordered him or where the money went. Silas unfolded Asa's surviving leaf. The 9 family names and parcel numbers ran along its edge. Hart read the first 2, then removed a ledger bound with cracked green leather from a cabinet behind the pulpit. During the hunger winter, the church distributed food purchased from Vale Mercantile, he said. Families signed notes because Gideon could not donate everything. Hart opened the ledger to January 1878. Jacob Rill had borrowed $28 in flour and salt. Thomas Mercer had borrowed $34. Beside each debt was a parcel number identical to the ones on Ace's list. All 9 names appeared within 6 weeks. Small debts had grown through storage charges, transport fees, and monthly interest. Families who could not pay signed liens against fields, wells, or grazing rights. Who collected the notes? Silas asked. The church did at first. Then Gideon settled our account and took assignment of the debts, which meant he owned the liens. Hart looked down. That was legal. The pastor brought out a second book containing land transfers witnessed in the church hall. 7 parcels had passed to Ashbend Holdings, Mercy Agricultural Trust, or Red Ash Grazing Company. Clara knew the names. Gideon sits on every board. The crime widened before them. Flour removed from military shipments had been sold as emergency relief. The same families paid inflated prices for food already meant for them, then lost property when they could not repay manufactured debts. Hart admitted Gideon had asked to borrow the Green Ledger the following afternoon, supposedly to reconcile charitable accounts for territorial supply investigator Edwin Hale. He had agreed. They had less than a day before the ledger entered Gideon's hands. Hart had accepted Vale money for the church roof, the winter stove, and the burial fund. Each gift had arrived when another family was too ashamed to question a debt. He said this without asking forgiveness. Silas understood why. A man could mistake dependence for gratitude until the day the benefactor asked him to choose between the truth and the people still relying on his purse. We copy both books tonight, Silas said. With what? Hart asked. 1 bottle of ink and no clerk? With every hand you trust. Clara shook her head. The more people who know, the faster Pike comes. The fewer who know, the easier the records burn. Hart looked toward the bell rope. Sunday service was 2 days away, but several farm families came each evening for coal and soup. Calling them now might protect the ledgers or divide the town before Silas understood the full chain. He chose a narrower risk. Hart would copy the 9 dead entries, while Clara copied the transfers. Silas would keep the originals in sight. They had finished only 2 names when a crash sounded from the alley. Morrow lay beside the church steps. Clara had found him half a mile from Silas's cabin and hauled him the rest of the way on a feed cart. Mud covered his belly, the wool wrap hung loose around his swollen joint, and a broken rope trailed from his collar. Before the leg failed, he had followed Silas's scent far enough to reach the town road. Clara knelt first. Stubborn old fool. Morrow ignored her and pushed his snout toward the green ledger in Hart's hands. Pine resin darkened one corner of its cover. This book never went near the fort, Hart said. Silas rubbed the mark. Beneath the resin lay a shallow impression shaped like a merchant's seal. Where was it kept during the winter? In the relief warehouse office. Morrow moved to the stack of old promissory notes and stopped at one bearing Clara's name. She stared at it. I never borrowed from the church. The note claimed she and Jacob had received $46 in provisions 3 days after Asa vanished. Her signature looked careful and elegant. Clara wrote with a cramped hand, and had never shaped her surname that way. Hart went pale. I witnessed this. Did you see her sign? Silas asked. I saw Vernon bring it with the others. He said Jacob had taken it home. The collateral line pledged Clara's house and 6 river acres. Gideon Vale had not merely rented the property to her. According to the note, his company had acquired it through a debt she never made. A wagon stopped outside the church. Gideon entered, carrying a leather document case. He greeted Hart, nodded politely to Clara, and regarded Morrow with practiced concern. I was told the animal escaped while Silas was trespassing, he said. A creature that old can injure itself following a master who no longer knows when to stop. Silas held up Clara's note. Did you buy this debt? The relief obligations were transferred to several companies. I would need to examine the record. You serve on every board. That is not ownership. Clara stepped forward. This is not my signature. Gideon's face softened. Grief can change how we remember unpleasant choices. He produced a county order authorizing him to collect the Green Ledger for the territorial review. Pike's signature appeared at the bottom. Hart hesitated. Refusing could cost the church its relief license, and Gideon knew it. Morrow struggled upright beside the pastor. His leg shook violently. When Gideon reached for the ledger, the hog seized the strap of his document case and pulled. The clasp opened. Papers spilled across the floor. Most were county forms. One listed properties scheduled for transfer after the depot road was approved. Silas saw his 3 rented acres near the top. Below them appeared Clara Wynn's house, the Rill Farm, the Mercer Well lot, and 6 other parcels from Asa's margin. Every property was marked for acquisition by Red Ash Grazing Company. The transfer date was Monday, the day of the territorial inspection. Gideon bent to gather the papers, but Clara placed one boot on the transfer list. "Leave that," she said. The softness left his face for only a moment. "Those are preliminary documents. They do not alter anyone's lawful rights. They alter where we sleep, only if the county approves the road." Silas looked toward the order in Gideon's hand. "And the man collecting the church ledger serves the company receiving every parcel beside it." Gideon straightened. "Red Ash Grazing has shareholders and legal counsel. I sit on its board because this county requires men willing to build something." Morrow still held the leather strap. Gideon crouched and loosened the buckle with careful fingers. "Asa used to feed you beneath the east stairs," he said. The hog released it. Silas felt the room change. Gideon had never spoken of Morrow as more than troublesome livestock. Now he knew exactly where Asa had fed him. Clara heard it too. "How often did you watch them?" "Often enough to remember a boy who mistook suspicion for courage." Reverend Hart held the green ledger against his chest. "I will bring this to the review myself. The order assigns custody to me. It authorizes collection. It does not forbid a witness from accompanying the book." Gideon considered him, then smiled. "Monday morning, then. Let us avoid turning Old Grief into another public spectacle." He left without the ledger. The wagon wheels had barely faded before Morrow sank onto his side. Silas and Clara carried him to the church kitchen. Hart warmed water while Silas loosened the swollen wrap. The joint had doubled in size, and the skin beneath the coarse hair felt hot. Morrow refused broth, but accepted water from Silas's palm. "You cannot keep following me," Silas said. "There is nothing left in your leg to spend." At the sound of Gideon's name from the next room, Morrow lifted his head toward the door. Clara watched him. He did that when Asa came home that last night. Silas stopped wringing the cloth. "Asa said Gideon had found the false weights." Morrow rose before I heard the name and stood at the door. "You never told me Asa named him. He did not accuse him. He said Gideon knew the weights were wrong and ordered everyone to finish the count before dawn. Knowledge was not the same as design. Gideon could claim he discovered an error too late, or that Vernon had deceived him." Clara sat opposite Silas. "Asa also said you signed the release sheet." "I signed what Vernon brought to the kitchen. The wagons were already unloaded." "Did you count the sacks?" Silas remembered 40 men waiting for supper. Asa had tried to place another paper beside the ledger. Silas pushed it away because the soup was burning, and the quartermaster wanted the signature before changing watch. No, the answer was smaller than the kitchen. For 11 years, Silas had treated his signature as something stolen from him. Now he remembered giving it freely because counting seemed like another man's duty. "Asa came to you first," Clara said. A memory returned clearly. Asa stood near the stove, flour on one sleeve, saying the east shed totals did not match the kitchen count. Silas told him to take the complaint to Vernon. When Asa insisted, Silas warned him not to shame the family by accusing officers without proof. He had forgotten those words because remembering them made disgrace more complicated than innocence. "I sent him back." Clara looked at Morrow. He went, her voice lowered. At dawn, Gideon brought the confession note. By then, Asa's bed was empty. His boots were gone, and everyone said he had run. But Morrow came back alone before noon. His belly was streaked with drain mud. Blue chalk marked his snout, and a strip from Asa's shirt was caught around his neck. Silas had seen the torn shirt in Clara's wash basin and accepted the town's explanation that Asa used it to wrap food for the road. He had never asked why the hog returned carrying it. "I should have followed him then," Clara said. "So should I." For the first time, neither of them spoke as though one failure could cancel the other. Asa had asked for help from both. Clara had believed a forged note because fear offered her a living son somewhere in the west. Silas had rejected the warning because authority offered him an easier supper shift. Morrow alone had returned to the place where Asa vanished. Hart entered carrying a small tin box found beneath the church feed ledgers, where Asa had kept tally pencils while helping Jacob. Inside lay 3 sticks of blue chalk, a broken brass key, and a strip of flour cloth covered in faded marks. Morrow pushed himself upright at the smell. Silas unfolded the cloth. Blue strokes ran in groups. 5, 5, 5, then 3. Beneath them, Asa had written one sentence. Morrow knows which door. The box was here all these years? Clara asked. Hart nodded. I thought it belonged to Jacob. The brass key bore a stamped E. The fort used lettered keys for storage rooms, but the east shed's main lock had been replaced. The key could belong to a chest, cabinet, or side door. The 18 chalk strokes might represent sacks, wagons, or days. Morrow sniffed the cloth, then turned toward the rear exit. His leg failed before the second step. Silas lifted his head. You are not leading anyone tonight. Clara studied the pigment. Jacob used this chalk on wagon hubs. It survived rain better than white. A blue mark had appeared on the chessboard beneath the quartermaster's floor. Perhaps Asa had marked more than one object. Silas remembered the east shed's 3 doors, the loading entrance, the grain passage, and a narrow ash door near the furnace trench. The county had boarded the last one shut because it opened toward a collapsed drainage channel. Morrow waited beneath the east stairs, he said. Gideon remembered that. Clara understood. Not the office stairs, the stairs behind the shed. Asa had fed Morrow there because the hog could crawl beneath the landing. A man could hide something in the same space without using the watch doors. They left Morrow with Hart and crossed toward Clara's house for tools. Halfway there, a bell rang from the sheriff's office. Deputies were nailing notices along Main Street. Fort Mercy and all relief properties were closed pending Monday's inspection. Unauthorized entry carried 30 days in jail. Another notice offered $50 for the recovery of missing territorial records. Gideon had turned their search into theft before they reached the next clue. Across the street, Vernon Shaw stood beneath the mercantile awning, speaking with Deputy Say. In his hand was a lead tag identical to the one Silas had found beneath the warehouse platform. The initials VS had never been a mistake. Vernon had planted them to direct suspicion toward himself and away from the man above him. He wanted me looking at him, Silas said. So you would stop looking higher. Vernon glanced across the street and tipped his hat. At Clara's house, the front door stood open. Drawers had been emptied, bedding cut, and the hearthstone had been lifted. Whoever searched the room knew where Clara had once kept the wagon receipt, but the original was still inside Hart's locked church cabinet. Nothing else of value had been taken. The search had been aimed at evidence, not money. On the kitchen table lay Asa's old coat, the one Clara had kept after the empty funeral. Someone had spread it flat and sliced open a seam beneath the collar. Clara touched the cut. I never knew that was there. Inside the lining, a narrow pocket remained, empty except for blue chalk dust and several coarse black hairs, Morrow's. Silas pictured Asa kneeling beneath the east stairs, hiding something in his coat while the young hog crowded beside him for grain. The animal had not merely remembered the fort. Asa had carried the proof against his body, and Morrow had learned its smell. Near the lower hem, almost lost in the faded cloth, Asa had stitched 3 letters in blue thread. E.S.D. East Shed Drain. Beneath them was a date from 11 years earlier, the morning after Silas signed the release sheet. The pocket had once held whatever the broken key opened. Now Gideon's men had found it first. Silas reached the east shed before dawn with Clara, Reverend Hart, and a coil of rope hidden beneath a feed tarp. They left the wagon beyond the cottonwoods and approached through the frozen drainage field. The county had boarded the ash door from the outside. A fresh iron bar crossed it, and Pike's notice had been nailed at eye level. Silas led the others downslope to the collapsed channel that once carried wash water from the shed furnaces toward the Red Ash River. The opening had narrowed to a black slit beneath fallen stone. Clara looked at Silas's shoulders. You will not fit. I used to clean it every spring. You used to weigh 30 pounds less. Hart held the lantern close to the ground. Blue chalk marked one stone near the entrance, almost erased by 11 winters. 3 short lines repeated the initials sewn inside Asa's coat. E.S.D. Silas removed his coat and crawled into the channel. The brick passage smelled of wet lime, mouse nests, and old flour paste. Frost coated the first 10 feet. Beyond that, the floor turned soft beneath his palms. Someone had entered recently. Narrow boot marks crossed the mud, their heel edges square. Vernon's prints, or prints meant to resemble his. The drain rose beneath the east shed. Silas found the underside of the ash door, then a cavity where 2 bricks had been removed. Blue chalk ringed the opening. Inside stood a small iron document box with its lid thrown back. It was empty. The lock had been opened cleanly. A rectangle of dry dust showed where a packet had rested, and beside it lay one torn corner of oilcloth. Silas searched every loose brick within reach. He found only 3 black hog hairs caught in hardened resin. Asa had brought Morrow there and hidden something inside the box. Gideon's men had taken it before Silas understood the message. A faint scrape came from farther along the drain. Silas raised the lantern. The channel continued beneath the shed toward an old settling chamber. He crawled another 20 yards until the bricks opened into a circular pit. The chamber was empty, except for a rusted shovel, 2 rotted sacks, and a man sitting against the wall with a revolver across his knees. Noah Briggs had once guarded the east shed. Now his beard had gone white, and whiskey stained his coat. "You took your time," Noah said. Silas kept the lantern low. "Did you empty the box?" "No. I watched Vernon do it yesterday." "Why not stop him?" "Because Pike pays me $5 a month to report anyone who comes near the drain." Clara's voice carried faintly from the entrance, asking whether Silas was alive. Noah raised the revolver. "Tell her to stay out." Silas studied the old guard's shaking hand. Fear could pull a trigger when courage could not. What was in the box? A packet of land abstracts, debt assignments, and Asa's statement. "I saw the top sheet before Vernon closed it. You could testify. I could also lose the room Vale lets me sleep in." Gideon had built a town in which every witness rented something from him. Land, food, warmth, or permission to be forgotten. Noah produced a folded scrap. Vernon dropped this. It was the lower half of a table headed relief assignments. The left column listed 9 parcel numbers Silas now knew. The right contained renewals, transfers, and foreclosure actions spread across 11 years. Some debts had been sold from one Vale-controlled company to another, adding fees each time. A $28 food note had become $412 before Jacob Rill lost his farm. The 9 original notes had multiplied into 27 later claims against wells, timber strips, and grazing rights held by children who had never signed the first debts. The scheme had outlived the winter that created it. Even if the original theft vanished from memory, each renewal produced another lawful-looking paper, another fee, and another family taught to mistake fraud for inheritance. At the bottom appeared a certification line bearing Sheriff Pike's signature. Pike had not merely protected old evidence. He had certified later transfers that kept the original theft profitable. "Why give me this?" Silas asked. Noah looked toward the dark channel. "Because Asa gave me the key." The broken brass key from Hart's tin box had once been whole. Asa asked Noah to hide the document box until a territorial officer arrived. Noah agreed, then told Vernon after Gideon promised no one would be prosecuted if the records stayed buried. Did Asa run? He reached the river crossing. Pike's predecessor brought him back before sunrise. "I saw him in the old holding room beneath the sheriff's office." "What happened after that?" By noon, the room was empty, and Gideon had a confession note. Silas stepped closer. "You know more." Noah's revolver rose again. "I know enough to have lived badly for 11 years. Boots sounded at the drain entrance. Pike ordered everyone out with empty hands. Hart called down that deputies had Clara at gunpoint and were unhitching the wagon. Silas folded the assignment scrap into his boot. Noah hid the revolver beneath a sack, then whispered that Vernon had carried the original packet from the drain to the county records office. After learning that Territorial Supply investigator Edwin Hale and a deputy marshal would arrive Saturday evening 2 days earlier than Gideon had announced, Vernon moved the packet into the sealed holding room beneath Sheriff's office. Gideon planned to replace the packet with clean abstracts before Hale opened the review Monday morning. If Vernon ran out of time, the old coal chute was the only route from the basement that did not pass the front desk. Silas crawled back toward the entrance. Pike arrested him as soon as his hands cleared the stones. Clara and Hart were placed against the wagon while deputies searched their coats. They found the broken key in Clara's pocket and the blue-marked cloth beneath Hart's shirt. Noah emerged last. When Pike asked why he had been inside, Noah answered that Silas forced him at gunpoint. Pike took Hart's church keys and announced that the green ledger was evidence in a conspiracy to steal county records. Deputy Say had already gone to collect it. Clara protested, but Pike said ownership would be decided after the inspection. On the road to town, Silas rode with his wrists tied to the wagon rail. They passed the church near sunrise. Its doors stood open. Say carried out the green ledger in a canvas sack, while Gideon waited on the steps. Morrow lay behind the hitching post, one side of his face resting in the snow and the injured leg stretched behind him. When Silas called his name, the hog lifted his head but could not rise. Gideon walked to the wagon. "The investigator will see records, signatures, and lawful transfers," he said. "He will not see the story you have built around an animal. Then why take every page before he arrives?" Gideon's expression remained calm, but his hand tightened around the rail. At the sheriff's office, Silas was charged with trespass, theft of territorial property, and conspiracy to alter land records. Bail was set at $300 more than he had earned in 4 years. Before the cell door closed, Clara pushed through the office crowd. Pike had left her free to care for Morrow, and Gideon preferred frightened witnesses outside a cell. She pressed Silas's coat through the bars. The hidden ledger leaf was gone from its lining. "Pike found it?" Silas asked. "No." Clara glanced toward the front desk. "Morrow tore it free before Say searched the church. Hart saw him crawl beneath the coal bin with it." Silas stared at her. He hid the page. For the first time since entering the drain, the dead end shifted. The hog could no longer walk to the evidence, but he had remembered how to protect it. By Saturday morning, the story Gideon Vale wanted Mercy Crossing to believe was already printed on the board outside the sheriff's office. Silas Boone arrested in land record plot. Below it, Vernon Shaw had posted a notice stating that anyone presenting unverified copies of county documents could be charged with fraud. Pike placed Silas in the front cell, where every customer entering the office could see him. Some stared, others avoided his eyes. The arrangement was meant to turn imprisonment into proof. Clara came before noon with Reverend Hart and Jacob Rill's eldest daughter, Martha, a woman of 43, who now rented the farmhouse her father once owned. Martha carried a flour tin containing $17 and 2 silver spoons. "Toward bail," she said. Silas looked at the tin. "Keep it. My father paid Vale $412 on a $28 food note and still lost his field. I have kept enough things that did not save us." By afternoon, the Mercer brothers brought a saddle. Clara pledged the 6 river acres Gideon claimed through the forged note, and Hart placed the church organ fund on Pike's desk. None of it reached $300 in cash, but the combined property exceeded the amount. Pike could reject one poor man's promise. Rejecting 9 families in front of Territorial Supply investigator Edwin Hale, whose stage had just been sighted east of town, was harder. Pike released Silas until Monday's review and warned that any approach to Fort Mercy would cancel the bond. Outside, more than 30 people waited. They did not cheer. Mercy Crossing had spent too many years distrusting Silas to become brave in a single afternoon. Yet they followed him to the church hall carrying notes, receipts, tax demands, and foreclosure papers kept in drawers because shame made them difficult to burn. Hart arranged the documents by parcel number. Clara read names aloud while Silas compared dates. A pattern appeared within an hour. Each original relief note had been assigned to a Vale company within 10 days. Each company added a fee with a different name: storage, recovery, survey, renewal, then transferred the debt again. Several signatures belonged to people who were ill, absent, or already dead on the recorded date. Thomas Mercer's transfer had been witnessed by Vernon Shaw 3 weeks after Vernon was supposedly serving at a supply post 70 miles north. Jacob Rill's lien included a survey fee dated before the county surveyor took office. Clara's forged note bore Reverend Hart's seal, but the seal design had not been adopted until the following spring. The papers did not rely on memory. They contradicted one another in ink. Silas took no satisfaction in it. Every error represented a moment when someone could have asked a question and did not. He had been one of them. Morrow lay near the kitchen stove, breathing shallowly. Hart had found the hidden ledger page beneath the coal bin exactly where Clara said. The hog had pushed it inside a crack behind the bricks, then collapsed across the opening. Now, he refused broth and could no longer put weight on the swollen leg. Silas sat beside him, while the others copied records. "You were right before any of us deserved it." Morrow opened one eye. When Silas unfolded the rescued page, the hog touched the lower edge with his snout. A dark smear crossed the back where coal dust had pressed into damp paper. Silas turned the sheet over. Faint raised lines appeared beneath the blackening. Impressions left when someone wrote on a page once resting above it. Clara held the paper toward the lamp, while Hart rubbed charcoal lightly across the surface. Words emerged backward. They copied them onto a clean sheet and read the message in the proper direction. Vale ordered 64 entered. Shaw entered 52. Pike holds confession. Original seals in. The final word had been cut off with the missing portion of the ledger. Pike holds confession, Clara said. Aces? Or the false one Gideon brought you? Hart examined the page number. This leaf came from the hidden ledger. The sheet above it may still be in the records packet Vernon took from the drain. The message proved coordination among Gideon, Vernon, and Pike, but an impression without the original could be dismissed as fabrication. They needed something the three men could not replace before Monday. Noah Briggs arrived after dark. The church hall quieted when he entered. Noah removed his hat and placed his revolver on the floor before speaking. He admitted reporting Silas at the drain. He admitted betraying Asa 11 years earlier. Several families demanded he leave. Silas stopped them. Let him finish. Noah said the old holding room beneath the sheriff's office had two doors, one from the jail corridor and one from an alley stair used to bring prisoners inside unseen. Asa had scratched his initials into the underside of the bunk while waiting for a territorial marshal who never came. After the drain search, Noah followed Vernon and saw him carry Asa's packet from the county records office into that same sealed room. Sheriff Pike had inherited the office, kept the basement closed, and controlled the only keys. Why would Pike keep a false confession? Clara asked. Because it carries Gideon's handwriting in the body and Asa's signature copied at the bottom. Destroying it would remove the one paper that can be compared with the note sent to you. Keeping it lets Pike threaten Vernon. Vernon forged the signature. Noah agreed to sign a statement, though his hand shook so badly Hart had to steady the paper. The statement alone would not open the basement. Pike would claim a drunk had invented it to avoid prosecution. At 9 that evening, Edwin Hale entered the church with Territorial Deputy Marshal Owen Rusk. Hale was a narrow man with dust on his black coat and no visible patience for ceremony. Gideon had met the stage and tried to take both officials directly to the hotel, but Hale had seen the crowd and asked why half the county was copying land records after dark. Rusk remained near the church door, listening without interrupting. Silas laid out the false weight calculations, Jacob's wagon receipt, the copied debt pattern, Noah's statement, and the charcoal impression. Hale listened without deciding whether any of it was true. I investigate fraud involving territorial supplies, he said. I do not retry county foreclosures. The supplies created the foreclosures, Silas answered. Then prove the chain in a form that survives objection. Hale examined the copied records and announced that Monday's depot inspection would be open to all named property holders. No transfer involving the disputed parcels could be finalized until the review ended. He would not order Pike to release county evidence without a warrant, and he would not accept pages whose custody could not be established. Gideon had lost the advantage of a private inspection, but not the room. After Hale left, Deputy Say arrived with a county order declaring Morrow destructive livestock. The hog was to be removed from town before sunrise and held at the cattle pens until Silas's trespass case ended. Silas read Pike's signature, then looked at the animal that could no longer cross the hall. The order allowed an owner to surrender the animal voluntarily outside county limits. Clara offered her wagon. Moving Morrow might kill him. Leaving him meant Pike's men would take him. Silas wrapped the hog in blankets and lifted him with help from the Mercer brothers. Instead of turning toward the county road, they carried Morrow into Hart's coal wagon and covered him beneath empty sacks. At midnight, while Say watched the north road, Clara drove the wagon behind the sheriff's office. Noah guided them to the alley stair. The basement door had been bricked over, but Morrow began striking one sack with his snout when the wagon passed a low coal chute. Silas uncovered his head. The hog smelled the resin-black cord wedged inside the chute. Behind it, hidden beyond arm's reach, something white showed in the darkness. Silas reached through the iron grate and drew out a folded flour cloth, sealed with blue wax. Asa's initials crossed the flap. Morrow released one tired breath and laid his head against Silas's arm. Inside the sheriff's office above them, a chair scraped across the floor. The chair scraped again above them, followed by Pike's voice ordering Deputy Say to check the alley. Clara pushed the flour cloth beneath Silas's shirt, while Noah covered Morrow beneath the sacks. Silas had barely reached the shadows when Say opened the rear door. What are you doing here? Moving church fuel, Clara said. At midnight? The sheriff's order says the hog must leave town before sunrise. Coal wagons leave by the alley. Say stepped toward the wagon. Morrow's breathing sounded painfully loud beneath the sacks. Before the deputy could lift one, a bell rang from the hotel across Main Street. Edwin Hale stood on its porch with a lamp raised. "Deputy, I require the county seal inventory now." Say hesitated. Disobeying Hale in public carried a different risk than bullying Clara in an alley. He warned them to clear the street and hurried toward the hotel. Silas did not open Asa's packet until they reached Hart's cellar. The blue wax bore a thumbprint, and the cloth had been stitched with the same black thread used on the altered sacks. Hart, Clara, Noah, and representatives from the 9 families watched Silas cut the seam. Inside were 4 items: the original Eastshed tally sheet, 2 land debt assignments bearing Gideon Vale's private seal, the confession sent to Clara, and a second statement signed by Asa Wynne. Asa's statement was dated the morning after Silas signed the release record. It described the false weights, Vernon's altered counts, and Gideon's order to move 8 sacks from each listed shipment into the relief warehouse. Asa wrote that the missing food would be sold back through emergency notes secured by land. He named Noah as the man entrusted to hide the documents and asked that the statement be delivered to the Territorial Supply Office if he failed to return. The final paragraph answered the question Clara had carried for 11 years. Asa had not fled west. Gideon and the former sheriff intercepted him at the river crossing, held him beneath the sheriff's office, and forced him to sign a blank page. He wrote the statement before attempting to escape through the coal chute. Noah lowered his head. He did not. Clara remained still. Noah said Asa reached the alley but collapsed before dawn. Gideon ordered him buried near a survey marker later moved. Noah had helped load the wagon and spent 11 years trying to forget Morrow striking the holding room door. Silas expected Clara to accuse him, Noah, or the whole town. Instead, she folded Asa's statement and placed it beside the lamp. "Monday," she said. "They hear his words before they hear ours." By sunrise, Gideon knew the packet was missing. Pike arrested Noah for perjury, seized Clara's wagon, and closed the church as a site containing stolen records. That was the first resistance. Hale refused to cancel the inspection, but he would not accept the packet privately. The documents had been removed from county property by a man already charged with theft, and Gideon's lawyer argued that every page could have been planted. Hale ruled that the packet could be presented only in an open hearing where its custody, seals, handwriting, and contradictions could be challenged. The second resistance came before the hearing began. Vernon Shaw produced a new set of abstracts showing that Red Ash Grazing had purchased the disputed debts from an unrelated Eastern company. The documents carried territorial stamps and appeared cleaner than anything Silas possessed. Gideon explained that local records had been recopied years earlier after water damage, making discrepancies inevitable. The third resistance came when Pike placed Morrow's destruction order on Hale's table, accusing Silas of using the hog to damage property and conceal stolen papers. If Hale agreed, every object Morrow found could be excluded. By Monday morning, nearly 200 people filled the fort's mess hall. Hale sat between the county records and the family's copies, while Deputy Marshal Rusk stood near the evidence table. Gideon wore a dark coat. Pike stood behind him with a polished badge. Vernon arranged documents in precise stacks. Silas entered carrying Morrow on a door from Hart's coal shed. The weak leg splinted beneath 2 blankets. Laughter began near the rear wall and died when the 9 families rose. Gideon's lawyer objected before Silas spoke. He called Asa's packet stolen, Noah unreliable, Hart financially compromised, Clara emotionally prejudiced, and Silas a confessed trespasser. Hale allowed every objection to be recorded. "The truth is not improved by pretending its witnesses are clean," Hale said. "Proceed." Hart verified Jacob Wynn's handwriting from 9 years of church feed accounts. Clara identified the false signature on her debt note and then wrote her name before the room so the difference could be seen. Martha Rill compared her father's $28 note with the $412 foreclosure claim. 3 more families showed fees dated before the companies charging them legally existed. Gideon answered calmly. Clerical mistakes, copied seals, delayed filings, grieving memories. Before Silas touched the scale, Deputy Say rose from the public benches and placed a canvas evidence bag on Hale's table. Pike had ordered him to carry it to Gideon's office before dawn, Say said, but he had hidden it beneath loose boards in the jail stable instead. His inventory note listed the false weight, the brass sealing die, and the ledger page seized from Silas. Pike ordered him silent, but Hale told him to continue. Say testified that the sheriff had removed the bag from the locked cabinet and tried to place current evidence beyond the investigators' reach. Deputy Marshal Rusk took custody of the bag and sealed it in front of the room. Hale removed the false 50-pound block and placed it on the fort's certified beam scale, using sealed territorial standards from his own case. It balanced at 42 pounds. Vernon said corrosion had reduced it. Hale measured the intact dimensions and found no lost metal. He examined the casting seam, then compared its territorial mark with the brass die from the sealed bag. The mark had been struck after the block cooled. The bag did not by itself prove who created the weight 11 years earlier, but Pike's attempt to remove it proved that the present investigation was being obstructed. Sweat darkened Gideon's collar. Vernon then attacked Ace's statement. The signature, he said, was copied from supply forms. Clara placed the confession beside the statement. Both bore Ace's name, but the confession's body was written in Gideon's hand. Hart recognized it from years of donation letters. Hale compared the final strokes and found that Ace's signature on the confession had been traced over a faint pencil outline. Vernon had forged it, believing no one would place the two pages together. Gideon turned on him. You prepared those records. Vernon's composure broke. He said Gideon ordered the shortages. Pike's predecessor handled Asa, and Pike later certified the debt renewals in return for a share of every transfer fee. Gideon called him a liar, trying to save himself. Pike reached for the county files. Morrow moved before Silas could stop him. The hog rolled from the door and crawled toward the table, dragging the splinted leg. He ignored the flour sacks and pressed his snout against Gideon's clean abstracts. One page stuck to his wet nose, black resin marking its lower edge. Silas took the page and held it beside Ace's original tally. The same thread fibers and resin mixture appeared on both. Gideon's supposedly Eastern abstracts had been prepared in the relief warehouse, using materials from the old scheme. Hale cut the seal from one abstract. Beneath the territorial stamp lay a scraped county mark dated 3 years earlier. The records were not replacements. They were altered local documents. Pike tried to seize them. The Mercer brothers blocked the aisle, not with weapons but by standing shoulder to shoulder. Martha Rill began reading the names of the 9 families. Others joined her. The room that once accepted Silas's guilt now refused to let evidence disappear. Hale suspended every disputed transfer and placed the supply records under territorial seal. On the evidence presented in the room, Deputy Marshal Rusk served warrants for obstruction and territorial fraud. He ordered Pike to surrender his badge pending county review, took Vernon into custody as a cooperating defendant, and secured Gideon's store, warehouse, and company offices before sundown. Hale read the original tally, false weight, Ace's statement, Jacob's receipt, and the debt chain into the official record. Silas's signature proved negligence, not theft. I signed what I did not count, Silas told the room. Asa asked me to listen, and I sent him back into danger. Clear my name, if the record allows it. Do not clear my conscience. The distinction mattered. Mercy Crossing did not receive a flawless hero. It received the truth. 3 weeks later, searchers found Asa near the relocated survey marker. Clara buried him beneath his own name. Noah testified and accepted a sentence for concealing evidence. Gideon, Pike, and Vernon faced territorial charges. The 9 transfers were voided, and later claims frozen for review. Vale Mercantile was placed in receivership and later sold to repay the families whose debts had been manufactured. After the first thaw, Silas returned to the Limekiln cabin. The road had been redirected, and the eviction notice withdrawn. He folded the notice beside Asa's statement to remember how easily lawful paper could carry a lie. Morrow lay on the porch beneath a clean blanket. The joint never healed enough for him to walk farther than the trough, but he had survived the winter. Silas brought him warm mash in a shallow pan. The hog sniffed it, ate half, and rested his head against Silas's boot. Across the field, Clara planted 9 wooden stakes, where the recovered deeds would be returned to their families. No crowd watched. No badge changed hands. The only sound was thaw water, moving beneath the grass. Silas set Asa's brass key on the porch rail. I heard you late, he said. But I heard you. Morrow closed his eyes. For the first time in 11 years, Fort Mercy's silence no longer belonged to the men who had buried the truth.